independent of your own ideas. You want material goods, land, wealth, currency, raw materials, all of that, to work for yourself. And as one of the things that that Farrakhan said that I really like is that he said as he traveled around the world, every nation he went to, black people were on the bottom. And there's a reason why we've had to struggle so hard and why we are on the bottom. But I want to start with Africa because people, even those who say that they're nationalists or Pan-Africans feel very defensive about Africa and where we came from. And, they get upset when people say we lived in trees or, all this other kind of nonsense about eating people and all of that. Africa is a continent, and it has 54 nations now. And I thought what I would do to quickly go over that part is to give you some maps so we can talk about a few things about the continent. The first thing I want to say is Africa is a continent. It's not a country. Africa is made up of 54 nations if you count the island nations that surround them. And we'll look at that map a little bit later. But off of that continent, the majority of African Americans come from, it's over there now, come from the west coast of Africa, right? And so I'm not saying that that's the only place slaves were taken from, but I'm saying that Africans that were taken from the east coast of Africa were taken to other places like India, right? But on the west coast, those who came to what we call the islands, the Caribbean islands, the United States, Mexico, Central America, South America, came from these different groups here. And you can see it goes from Senegambia all the way down to what is modern day Angola. And, sorry?
You have another one of those maps? Thank you.
Oh, okay. And you can see a few of the names of populations that we know. Like we know the Wolof now, we know the Hausa now, we know Ghana now. But along that coast, all the way down almost to South Africa, are the different places where we came from. And so how do we get into this situation? And you usually hear one or two stories. One, you hear that Europeans came, attacked with guns, and they were able to take people into slavery, and they just took them to go do some work. Very general kind of description. And then others say, no, that's not what happened. Africans sold Africans into slavery, right? Both things are true. Both things are true. And what also is true is that a lot of nations, I'd rather say nations and tribes. I just got this thing about tribes. Some nations moved into the interior to get away from those nations that would colonize and sell people. Mashriki, that we all know, had an experience when she had, remember she had Africa Today, Africa something downtown?
Yeah, that big African convention
Yeah.
she did.
One of the Africans that was there with her, she said people were looking at the guy who was the Ashanti king or whatever, he's all in. This other man looks not all decked out like that, but he told her, if you get to Africa, I want to show you where you came from. And he talked about how his people had to leave the coast of Ghana and go further north to get away from the Ashanti who were selling people, right? And I also know other researchers who did a very interesting study where African American professors went to Africa and hooked up with some African researchers, and they went to places where they know slaves were taken from, and they wanted to see if there was stories or something in the culture in terms of stories and dances and things that where they recalled slavery. And they run across some people who still have it incorporated into them. And the story I liked best was, Sandra Richards told me this. She said that they went to this place where the men left with the male professors and went out to places to show them where slaves had been taken from. And the women, when she said to one of the women in the village, you know, they're going to show them where some weapons are or something. She said, oh no, they can't do that. And she said, well, why? She said, because they might come back. They might come back to get us. Now that's after slavery has been gone over 100 years on the continent. So it's not that we are forgotten. It's not that they don't feel the scars of it. But Africa is, you cannot just have some kind of simple view of Africa as all these people who are heroes or all these people who have succumbed to slavery. The second map goes further and talks about Western Africa and trade. And Europeans played great attention to this because they wanted Africans that were skilled in various things. One of the things was the growing of rice and of indigo, which is, from what I understand, plants that you use to get dyes from. They also wanted iron workers. So when they took people from Africa, they would go to certain places where they knew that these skills were, right? And so we also see that, you know, it wasn't like a bunch of elephants and tigers and black people walking around in with arrows following Tarzan. Okay. They had trade. There was economy along these along the shores where we came from. And incidentally, we come from the West Coast, but it goes into the Congo region as well, right? The next map looks at not only the triangular trade that went on, but it also looks at where people went in slavery. And as you can see, somehow people forget that slavery was in Europe as well. The slaves that were taken to Europe were not used for agrarian work because they already had feudalism. And feudalism just means that a group of people lived on the land of what they call a lord or a duke or whatever, all them names that they have. And they had to work that land. They couldn't leave the land. They couldn't hunt. And they didn't get paid. And to me, that's slavery. You know, coming at me. And so the slaves that were taken to Europe were taken to be in households, right? And to be craftsmen there. But the vast majority, we have to say, came to the Americas and Brazil. And we know that Brazil had the largest population of Africans there. And that the majority of the people from Brazil came from what we today call Angola. Right. Now, in the trade, yes, some went through the Middle Passage, and we know that they say that's where they broke Africans, you know, by torturing them and doing various things to them to make them docile to be able to be slaves. But we don't talk about the fact that not only did they fight against slavery from the very beginning, but that they fought against slavery on the continent. You know, we know that there was Nzinga who fought against slavery, but there were others. Abdel Kader Kane, who was a Muslim leader. Because when you look at the maps later, you can see that some of the places where they came from, you'll see where it says caliphate on the earlier maps. That indicates Islamic society. Okay. And so they would fight there. They would camouflage their villages. They would pounce on slave traders, whether they were black or white. In the Americas, they had what we call maroon societies, and that is where they would run into the mountains and places where white people didn't want to come, like swamps, arid lands, up in mountains, and the like. And there were a lot of them more in South America than it was in what came to be the United States of America. And so you can see that they were all through the islands, all through North and South America. And you can't make it out of the map, I'm sorry, that you can see that there were a lot of colonial empires. It wasn't just England. France had colonies, Spain had colonies, Portuguese had colonies as well. And then the last map on here is present-day Africa. And there you can see the 54 nation states, and you can see how it's connected to the Middle East, that Saudi Arabia is not very far from the east coast of Africa. And Saudi Arabia participated in the slave trade. They, some people argue, some scholars argue that Arabs enslaved more Africans than did Europeans. And so that's what the last map shows. And then I have this, I call these things guesstimates. We researchers, we follow primary documents and things and try to put numbers together to try to figure out various things about what happened to black people. This shows the various regions that we talked about. It shows the percentage that we think came to the Americas, the various areas that they come from. And you can see that it seems as though the majority came from Angola/Congo region. And then the Gold Coast and the Bight of Biafra. The Bight of Biafra is right where Igbo people live. So Igbo land is right around there.
That's in Nigeria.
Southeast Nigeria is where Igbos live. So, we talked a little bit about the early escapees, the maroon societies. There's a film, if I can get it, or Alvin probably help me. It's called Polangro, and it talks about this maroon society. It's a movie made about a maroon society in Brazil. It's a very good movie. We have maroon societies in areas around Florida, in some of the southern states as well. And the interesting thing, I think, is that when you look at Africans when they were brought from the continent, they're speaking a lot of different languages, right? We think about, Nigeria, what we call Nigeria today, they speak Nigerian. And then Ghanaians, they speak, I guess, Ghanese or something, But one area of a modern state has, like Nigeria, has 300 languages. Just Nigeria.
Wow.
So the people who are getting on these ships, you can't even talk to each other. I mean, you can kind of make out like, man, we don't know what's going on. So it's like, you can tell by the body language, but in terms of trying to plan, how do you plan around that? How do you plan when you get to the middle passage? How do you plan how to resist these folks, right? But once you are settled in an area and language is merged together, then you are able to resist in a better way. And so people did resist. And of course, we know that there were people from the beginning that were educated. We say, well, Tarzan didn't let Africans go to school, so they didn't have any language or skills or whatever. But some, as I said, some of them were Muslim, and they came here and they knew how to write, and they knew how to express themselves. And a lot of people began to learn language and learn how to do things. It is in the U.S. mostly, what we call the U.S. today, where it was against the law to learn. But if you were in England, or if you were even in the islands sometimes, you can learn languages and you learn how to write and what have you. And of course, we all know of one person who did a great bit of writing, and that was David Walker. He wrote David Walker's Appeal. And it's really a religious kind of plan, you know, that God wants us to be free and God doesn't want this to happen to us or whatever. He comes up dead. A lot of people did. Paul Cuffe, who was, he owned a fleet of ships, and he had made some money. Some Africans who were freed, and we're going to talk about this when we kind of merge this whole slave trade thing into the American government. He took people to Africa on ships. Of course, he couldn't take too many, you know, but he did take some people to the continent and into the islands. So now let's talk about America, what we call America today. It was not America when slavery began in the Americas. The first thing I want to correct is that we think that slavery started in 1619. They stirred around, they went to Virginia, Bali, Squee. It started more in the early 1500s. And Alvin, can you pull up that map now? Usually when we think about slavery, we think about the United States. Did you go through there? Yes. Okay. We think about the United States, but we have to remember, colonialism, to me, the best definition of colonialism is armed robbery. Because that's what it is. You know, you go to a place, you kill the people, you enslave them, and you take what is theirs. You take their resources away from them. You take control away from them. And all of Europe was doing that. And as you can see, we talk about, in the yellow is English, the English colonies. And you can see the pink, that's the Dutch colonies. The pink one really is was New Sweden. And up around what we call now New York was the Netherlands. They had colonies up there, and with the wars, the Scandinavian wars, the United States ended up, or the English colonies, let me say, ended up taking what they call New Amsterdam, and they named it for the Duke of York or whatever. And so it became New York, right? New Sweden's colony did not last very long at all. And, but when you go down to the brown, that's where the Spanish were. And the Spanish were there in 1513. The first slave rebellion was in 1521. So clearly, we were in the Americas 100 years before we thought we were there. And we were intertwined with the ongoing fights and arguments from the European colonists to try to set up control over all of the land. So, if you follow me, in Florida we were speaking Spanish, and then you have the yellow, you have English, you have the pink, that's Sweden, and then you have people who spoke Dutch. And so all these black people ended up merging together when England took over the northern border, where we have, the Netherlands, right? And it was a minute before we got to Florida. One of the things, this is kind of like a side note, but I just think it's so shrewd, I think, on the part of the slaves. One of the arguments they had, of course, was over religion, because remember, there were the Protestant Reformation and all that kind of stuff, right? But some countries in Europe remained Catholic. So what would happen is that once Spain had began to let go of slavery, right, and became more involved with their religious roots and all of that, anybody who was against, who accepted Catholicism could come to where, to Spain, right, to the Spanish in Florida, right? So black people would say they were Catholic. Okay. Praise the Lord. Amen.
Was it pointing in the direction of Florida?
Yeah, they're keeping me away from the God of my understanding. I was like, that is very true. The other thing we have to understand too is that slaves served on ships as well. And that's one of the ways black people would get information from one part of the United States to the other. Because when they would pull into a port, like in South Carolina or whatever, there are slaves that are working on the ship, and there are slaves there to sell goods and the resources that they need to furnish their ships with supplies and stuff. So they would tell each other what was going on in other parts. And in 1804, one of the things that happened was Haiti rebelled against Napoleon and won, right? And so that information got up to the people in the Americas. So they knew a lot about what was going on. Another thing we have to understand is that there's no clear division between black people in the Caribbean and black people in Americas, because a lot of people in America owned plantations and farms in the islands, and they would take their slaves back and forth, right? So you start off where there's these big divisions because of language, but then it becomes more and more homogeneous in terms of language, right? Yeah, ma'am.
DOS, descendants of slaves. So this descendants of slave business that some of the African Americans here in the United States are talking about, Caribbeans aren't, isn't. Because they were descendants of slaves. You've got Caribbean black people.
Yeah, one of the lessons we're going to have is going to be about reparations and the debates about it and whether you should include people from the islands or not.
Stay tuned.
And some white Congress people argue that if America has to pay reparations, so does Africa, because they helped to capture slaves, to send them over there, so.
Well, why didn't they make white folks as slaves as they did the black folks? Why did they do black folks?
Oh, they didn't do black folks only. I'm glad you said that. We call them indentured servants.
Yeah.
Right? Those people that I was talking about that lived in feudalism in Europe, and that's just their name for slaves. People kill me. My professors would be trying to tell me, no, that's different. No, that ain't different. If I can't leave where I'm at, if I don't have any money, if I have to work for you and do what you tell me to do, that's slavery. Right? And so a lot of people, wanting to get out of that, would say, look, if you pay my passage to America, I will work for you. Usually the term was 7 years, right? And then, after I worked that 7 years as an indentured servant, then you set me free. But what a lot of white people would do was when they got here and they got to understand the land a little bit better, they left. How you gonna find them? Because they're looking just like you, so if they go somewhere else and say, oh, well, I am the son of the Duke of York or whatever. What you gonna do about it? But and then Native Americans knew the land too well, and they could escape, and they had weapons and they could attack as well. But black people stood out like a sore thumb, and that's one of the reasons why they focused on Africans, because Africans could be told apart from the Native Americans and from the so-called indentured slaves. So, of course, we know everybody learned in grade school and high school that, America was formed. They beat up King George III of England, and they made the United States this great democracy. And so you can pull up the Constitution. But most people don't talk about the fact that slavery was a big problem even then, because Quakers and other religious groups just thought slavery was wrong. How can we say to King George that we are free and all people, no, you know how y'all are, all men. All men are created equal, and then enslave somebody. It just ain't right, And so you have this argument among the people who live there about slavery being wrong. And some of the people in the North did what we call manumit slaves. And what that meant is that, they didn't get holier than thou and say, I set thou free. What they did was say, you know what, I think that this is wrong, but I got to hold on to you because I can't, I'll be broke if I have to pay you. So here's the deal. When your child is 18, I'll let your child go. And they can be free. Right? Or they might say to the person, like, Maurice got captured out because he wasn't in Wakanda. He shouldn't have left. And they might say to you, when you're 30, I'll let you go. But so manumission meant that you would get free, but there's this kind of contract you have to keep before you can get free. And did I bring mine? Okay. Article 1 in the Constitution. Let me see where it is. Okay. Section 3 of the Constitution. No, number 3 under Section 2. You read there, and it tells you what they were doing there was trying to decide in this democracy, how are we going to vote on stuff? How are we going to set up our government? And they finally decided, well, we'll have the House of Representatives and we'll have the Senate. After a lot of argument back and forth, the Senate, they said each state would have 2 senators. And the House is based on population. The number of representatives that you have is based on your population. So, you come up with a number. I think the number then was 3,000. For every 3,000 people, you have 1 representative. So some states automatically have more representatives, and so the debate about slavery have been kept at bay. But then when it came, they said, this country will not say that black people are citizens, not even citizens. But when it came to counting votes, right, that will determine how many people you have in the legislature. All of a sudden, the South wanted to count the black population. And the representatives from the North said, oh, hell no, You said that you're not counting black people as people. So therefore, you don't get to count them to determine how many representatives you would get. But with counting the slave population, that would mean that the South would have more seats than the North, right? So they argued back and forth, so the compromise was what?
1/3 or 1/4?
3/5 of the population can be counted. And that was politicized by saying, you are saying that a black man is 3/5 of a person, right? So that's the first place it is. And then go down to section 9 of the same article. Go down again. Okay, section 9.
3/5 is less than a third.
Okay. Section 9, part 1 is talking about slavery. You know, they arguing back and forth. And they said that, okay, after 1808, you can no longer import slaves to America. It did not say you cannot have slavery. It said you can no longer,
Bring in the
Yeah.
new one.
which don't make any sense to me. Now, come on now. We are in the 21st century, and America can't keep cocaine out of here, can't keep heroin out of here. Now all of a sudden, everybody was making money off of slavery. Said, okay, after 1808, I won't bring any more slaves. Come on now, come on. Now they're saying now that the last slave ship actually got here in 1860, right before the Civil War started. I think it's called the Clotilda or something like that. But you know, they were still bringing slaves in. But the Constitution said that after that, you cannot import any slaves. And then the next place is Article 4. That's 3. Okay, that's 4. Okay. Number 2, it says the person charged, that a person who has run away, a slave who has run away,
It is served.
has to be taken back to the slave owner or what have you. Okay, so I'm done with the Constitution now. Are there any questions about that? Any questions so far?
Just wondering if you knew, what you probably don't, how they came up with 3/5 of a person, which is less than a third.
Compromise, yeah, a compromise, just compromising back and forth, arguing with each other. Because see, the thing was that, the South could have said, but since they had more wealth at the time, South could have said, forget it, I'll make my own country, I don't need you. But they did need each other. Because the Europeans were still, they didn't think this whole exercise of America was going to work. So it's kind of like they just waiting for things to go wrong, they're going to come back and recolonize. So they realized, the North and South realized we got to hang together whether we like each other or not. Otherwise, we end up back colonized. And all that fighting we did in the Revolutionary War would mean nothing, right? And yes, black people did fight in the Revolutionary War. It wasn't just Crispus addicts who ran out in the middle of the Tea Party and got shot. There were people who fought in the war, and they fought on both sides. Because Britain told black people, if you work for us, then you will be free. So it's like, hey, I'm gonna do this. And some like the democratic idea, and so they fought with, the people who fight against Britain. And what Britain did is, after the war was over, the black soldiers who fought for them, they sent them to Nova Scotia because they still owned Canada, right? And eventually, they set up to me it's a colony, but they set up a place in what we call today Sierra Leone, and that's where the black people went. And then so black people hooked up with those who were against slavery, Quakers and William Lloyd Garrison and some other people who, said that the Constitution was not about equality and that black people should not be held in slavery, and they were called the abolitionists. And they worked with the concept of moral suasion. that they could persuade people that slavery was wrong, and eventually they would win that argument. And so African Americans worked with the abolitionists, and the one we know best, of course, would be Frederick Douglass. But there were a whole lot of others who did as well. And it is here where black people start doing newspapers, right? Not, it just wasn't the North Star that Frederick Douglass did, but there was a lot of newspapers, and the conversation was about what we can do to get free. How can we get out of this situation, right? And then by the 1840s, they started having what we call the Negro Conventions. And the Negro Conventions was, they were held, of course, in the North, in Philadelphia, in Boston, and places like that. And they came together to talk about what we can do to get out of this situation that we're in. How can we gain political rights, economic advancement, and the like. And one of the things that they really fought a lot about is whether they should try to leave the United States. And at the time, the United States did not go all the way to California, right? You had a lot of territory out there. Mm. And some people felt like, well, we should move outside of the United States and set up territories out there. After all, some Native Americans have fought with us against white people. Sidebar. Not all did. You know, there were some Native Americans who were hired as slave catchers. Mm-hmm. Wow. And there were some African Americans who fought for white people to take land from Native Americans. Mm-hmm. And y'all like them a lot. Buffalo soldiers. And I'm like, yeah, I don't know about all that, right? But they were talking about moving outside the boundaries of the then United States and to set up free places for them to live. And it's like, well, how are you going to do that? How are we going to do that? Some of us in the North, we make a little taste of change, but not a lot of money. They discriminate against us. And then the biggest argument was, you cannot leave our people enslaved. The first thing we got to do is to get the people that are enslaved out of there. And you can't do that if you're trying to have a country outside of these United States. So that was a big argument, right? One of the other things that they said was that we have to have a national newspaper. We have to keep each other informed as to what's going on in your town, in your state, about ways that have worked to kind of at least free people a little bit more, that kind of thing. And we have to have some education facilities, because as we free slaves from the South, then they need to be trained to do other things. Now, mind you, as we talked about it first, a lot of black people, when they came here, they already were skilled. They were iron workers, they were good agrarians, farmers and the like, carpenters and the like. But they were saying that, the majority, though, are in the fields. And so they need to be trained to, have a farm and how to run a farm, or learn some other kind of skill to take care of them and their family, right? And so they wanted to have, to develop trade schools that would help to train people to be able to support their families and live in freedom, right? Freedom is work, freedom ain't free, and if you're going to be free, that means you have to be responsible for yourself. And if you're going to have a family, you got to be responsible for that family. And if you're going to be a part of a community, you have to be responsible for that community. So freedom ain't free, right? And so they knew that. And so they tried to have some kind of educational facility to help. Some said you need to go back to the continent. Or we can set up a nation in Mexico. One of the people who was talking about immigration back to the continent was Martin R. Delaney. I'm sure some of you all know Dr. Martin R. Delaney. And he makes it to what we would say today is Nigeria, but to the Yoruba kingdom. He made it to the Yoruba kingdom. And he talked with one of the kings of a Yoruba section about Africans coming back to settle there. And the Yoruba king said yes, that you could. But when he got back to the United States, guess what was jumping off?
The Civil War.
The Civil War, right? So Delaney and about 300,000 other black men joined in the fight against the South. Which brings me to that Emancipation Proclamation. The Emancipation Proclamation is misunderstood. We say, oh, Lincoln, he set the slaves free. And that's not what happened. What happened is that, this whole fight and debate about slavery was steady going on, and Lincoln didn't like slavery. But he didn't think that black people could live with white people.
Right.
That they were entirely different. And that, if slavery was ever over with, black people would have to separate themselves. And so he looked into sending them to Mexico, trying to figure out, how to make the separation. And it was just cost prohibitive. How are you going to move? Because by the time of the Civil War, the guesstimate is that there were 4 million black people, right? And so, and 500,000 or so of those lived in the North. I don't know how deep I want to go into the Civil War stuff, but the Republican Party embraced the fact that one man shouldn't own the other, but Lincoln did not make it a part of his platform to say, if you make me president, I'm gonna free the slaves. That's not what he said. But the South just kind of said, no, y'all are getting too close to trying to mess up our economy, and so they seceded from the Union or whatever. So a lot of the military might and discipline was in the South. And so in the first part of the Civil War, the South was winning, and so Lincoln needed some more soldiers. And so he said that slaves that were in the rebelling states, those states that had seceded from the Union, they freed. But those that are in states that are not in rebellion, like Kentucky and Maryland, right?
Virginia?
No, the South held Virginia.
Okay.
I think they held Virginia. So they weren't free, right? But the black men in the South, when they said, "You gonna give me a gun?" You gonna give me a gun? Oh well, it's on now. This is on. And the black soldiers who came into the Civil War helped turn the tide of the war, right? And Douglas said, and Tubman said that Lincoln changed, watching that. When he saw how black men could be soldiers, how they could organize themselves, he had to say, I thought that black people could not be a part of the United States. I don't know how well that'll work, but I would support the 13th Amendment. I will support it. And of course, as soon as the war was over, he was killed. And so, a lot of people, students have asked me, well, since black people fought against slavery in the Civil War, why didn't they rebel and just, gain land and do a lot of other things? You're looking at 300,000 out of 4 million. So the majority of black people were not armed, did not know how to wage war. And so it's 3 o'clock, and that's when I said I would stop, and the last half an hour will be discussion about, what we talked about. Week after next, we'll talk about Reconstruction, where black people really get involved in American politics.
So those black people that had been, that fought against the South and had guns and those kind of things, and after Lincoln got elected and he died, what were they doing? Where were they at?
I don't know if I understand.
The black people who had acquired arms
Yeah.
and knew military strategy and those types of things, even though they were a small portion of the black community. You said that Lincoln got killed, but he said he would support the 13th Amendment. What happened to those people? What were they doing? Where were they at?
Good question.
That is a good question. Some of them were from the North, and the Army was the first place that black men had where they could, make physical money, right? And so they would stay in the military in the North. In the South, we'll see. Next time we're going to talk about Reconstruction. What happened to the black people in the South when the Civil War was declared to be over with? Yeah, that's what that's going to be what we talk about. There were skirmishes, however you say that word, between black people and some white people in certain towns. But the black soldiers were overwhelmed by the white population, which, just as a rule, had guns.
And they weren't supported in the North either, right?
For a minute, Reconstruction looked as though it was going to help black people to become free. And Reconstruction is really complex. We have the Freedom Bureau, which is what we're going to talk about. The real name of it is the something, 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 and the Reclamation, but people just call it the Freedmen's Bureau. And Congress set that up to help slaves to leave plantations and farms. And mind you, most black people were not on plantations, they were on farms, right? And they came up with rules that tried to help them to get settled, to give them clothes, to give them food. Reconstruction said that they would be able to sue and participate in the court system, and that the white farmers and plantation owners had to make contracts, employment contracts with their ex-slaves. And so it's a whole lot of that we're going to talk about next time.
Now, where do we get this whole mentality as black folks? Even fighting at that time would have gotten a sense of pride. Where does that we are nobody stay with us so that we can't even appreciate each other?
Du Bois had this theory that black people had a double consciousness. And what that meant is, on the one hand, since they knew no other country, they felt like they were American. But then on the other hand, that they knew that they had been treated as second-class citizens, and they felt that too, and that the other citizens in the country did not think that they were up to par, that they were equal to white people in any shape, form, or fashion. And so, living with that across 500 years, it's embedded in some people. But what I would say is that it's not only African Americans who suffer from that. I think that across the last 1,000 years, women did too. Had the same kind of double consciousness, you know. I'm supposed to be an American citizen, but I'm less than the white man, right? And then in the 60s, they came to call it a plantation mentality. That black people didn't think that they were supposed to have what white people did have. And so it's been very difficult to combat that, and but that's one of the things a lot of activists, back in the day they called them race people. They call they call them race people because what they were about was changing things for the race, right? And so, in some people it's an integral part of their psyche, how they actually feel. But those who were activists, Pan-Africans, nationalists, that's one of the things I think that nationalists were able to combat well. I mean, you still have those who feel less than, but at least we have begun to accept ourselves as a group of people. You know, it was a time when people were ashamed of their hair. We're no longer ashamed of our hair or our color, you know. And we know that there's that insidious racism built into American institutions. We ain't crazy now.
And education too.
You know, Mary Evans said, just because you're paranoid don't mean you ain't right.
Amen. Yeah.
So, you know, that's something that people constantly fight against. And I don't know, one of the things I think has been a very big help to us also is you can go online and find this. It's Social Workers of America, Black Social Workers of America. That's one of their goals is in fighting that. And I'm sure they have a website that you can go to. So I don't know what the answer to that is. I just know that people have worked hard to get beyond that feeling less than.
Because right now, I'm in my season that I am so proud to be black. I thank God that I'm black. But then when I greet other blacks, it's like they are angry with me because I'm happy in my blackness. So how do I combat that day to day? I love people. So when I greet you, I see you, I love you. But when I say it to a black person, I see you, I love you, they turn and get disgusted with me or think I'm crazy. So how do I do that? How do we come back to that place where we're just people?
Social workers, black social workers. Yeah, I'm a political scientist. I study power, and I know that we are slowly but surely gaining power. But I can't answer that. I honestly can't answer that. What's your name? You had your hand up first, and then you.
Oh, yeah, it was, I don't know if it's relevant still to the conversation, but I was just, this kind of a small, question is how were black veterans of the Civil War treated versus their white counterparts? And I think that was more off of what Ms. PB's question was, but it's not pressing.
That's a good question. I don't think I can give you a good answer for it. What I will say is that in Reconstruction, during the Reconstruction era, y'all just gonna make me do this lecture today. It's week after next.
Yeah, 2 weeks. My bad, 2 weeks.
Reconstruction, what was I gonna say? Black people began to get involved in politics. And because of the safety of the Union Army, some of them were able to found towns, were able to start businesses. were able to argue amongst themselves about what they should do to help people to grow. And one of the things that, you know, and this is why I don't understand today, when I hear young people say, so-and-so's trying to act like they white, what the hell does that mean? You know, after the war, one of the things that they were dead set on was education. You know, it's like, it's something about being able to read. It's something about being able to read and figure that seem to be important to getting ahead. And so we have to focus ourselves on education. But the only social institution that they had that was stable all the time was the church. You know, and I might ask Joseph Tucker Evans to come and talk about that because he studies blacks and religion.
Is he the Africanist?
Yeah. Yeah. He can come and talk about that. No, he's an Africanist.
I thought he was.
In religion.
Can you? Well,
One more.
oh, okay.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Was curious about how you feel. Okay, so what's specific to the culture and ideologies of Europe in their minds necessitated chattel slavery?
They enslaved their own.
Because you know, that's one of the things yeah. But you know, that's the thing that I think we have to look at. Lots of empires had slaves. There were slaves in China, Korea, in the Slav states, in Eastern Europe. There was slavery in Africa.
Yeah.
What's the uniqueness about American slavery?
But
Property. Chattel.
because chattel slavery means that they never over with. And then you are considered property and you can be sold from one person to another. And that was made into an institution, right? It was the same in Europe, it just money didn't change.
But was the difference was in Europe, were your children also enslaved when they were born in Europe too?
Yeah.
Okay.
So is there
So what about-
So is there anything unique
Yeah,
about it?
and what about European culture and in their own unique environment created that ideology that created an institution?
To me, I think slaves, you know, back in the day, their slaves were electricity. You know, by that I mean the hard labor that had to be done. If a person could force another person to do it for them, or to help them do it, they can produce wealth quicker. And so if you had a way to dominate somebody else, then you could make them do what it is you don't want to do. So like for me, like now, if I had 200 or 300 slaves, I could build a nation.
And then basically what you're saying, and I just want to make sure, you're saying that human nature in the way we involve slavery has always been a part of it.
It's always
Is
been
there
there.
anything unique
It
about
was
chattel
all,
slavery?
it's not. Child slavery, I don't think is unique either. I think because child slavery means that if you are a slave to one person, you can also be enslaved by another person. And you can do that, it could be a exchange in money, it could be a change in terms of barter, right? It could be by force. To me, like today, we try to get around this whole thing about there being slavery by saying it's human trafficking. Now, if you take me out of Asia, force me to be a sex slave, I can't leave where you said I go. I don't keep the money that you make on selling me.
Well, would the one thing be
That's
that it was,
slavery.
and of course, I don't know about ancient civilizations, but in the United States, that it was legalized, laws on the
It
books?
was legal in Rome, it was legal in Greece.
Well, maybe
Okay.
one difference is the coupling of genocide of the native people and a whole large volumes of land that were depopulated through killing and genocide.
Is that Asian Americans?
Well, I don't know.
But see, that's what empires are. We like to, say you know, empires are wonderful and it's great and this, that, and the other. Empire means you go around stealing people's stuff.
Well, I guess my one more question, just to make sure. So typically the way it's been portrayed in history and even the way we've looked at it as a people is that, you know, before you conquer somebody, you can make anybody a slave.
Yeah.
But in the United States, there was only one group of people that could be slaves.
No, at first they tried to enslave
Right,
Native
it
Americans
didn't work.
and they couldn't. It didn't work.
Right.
If it would have worked, they would have
Done
made
that
them
too.
slaves too. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we
That's,
might have
you know,
missed it.
But,
Yeah.
yeah.
And in Greece, you know, most people were slaves.
Mm-hmm. That's what
You know, and in Rome, you know, we talk about the Roman Empire. They conquered people and they made them slaves.
Mm-hmm.
But were they slaves, children?
That's what you just said, yeah.
Yeah,
Even
For
that true.
500 years forward, that same.
It was as long as they could keep it going.
As long as they can kick your butt, as long as they can whoop you, then you the slave. And until you can whoop me,
What about the
What's
role
up, man?
I think King was trying to get to the question of culture and race, and dehumanizing Africans to justify the enslavement.
what?
He
You
wants
can
image.
take human beings and say, well, they're not really human, they're animals, but how do you, and I suspect that's what King was trying to touch on, the role of culture and race in dehumanizing a group of people. Have you seen the uniqueness in that, or again, similar pattern regardless of empire?
Yeah.
Regardless of empire. You know, one of the Korean women who was at Northwestern with me, her dissertation was on Korean people in Japan who were treated much like African Americans are here, and still are. You know, one of the best systems you could see is in India with the Dalits. What do they call them?
Yes, the solid.
Yeah, you can explain that. And one Hindi person said to me that a Dalit has said to him, well, why is it that, you know, the population of Dalits is larger than Hindus, that you should be the ones in control? And the Hindi said, well, because we need more of you to take care of us. And the Dalit said, oh. And, you know, and I know you know, in India, they try to do some kind of affirmative action program
Yeah, and
there that they do here.
and
You
it
know,
doesn't involve
and it didn't work. It didn't work. So they still are, they have that double consciousness that Du Bois talked about as well.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
Vijay Prashad talks about that in the Karma Brown book, where he directly correlates that. But I think, I mean, the system in India is very complex, and it also varies from region to region of how caste is manifested. And even though, like, I mean, there is affirmative action and policies towards that, but it ends up being that a lot of those who still fell within the caste system but were not Brahmin are often taking up most of those seats. And there's still a lot of incredible underrepresentation of Dalits. And I think the question here for me also is how does the creation of a nation state and white supremacy and racial categorization in science relate to chattel slavery? And I think I had the same question was what was it about the European context that led to that?
Well, to me, the person who has the weapons gets to be the master. That's just it. That's all.
And then they were looking, and they were going around colonizing the world. They were.
It's you know.
They named the 6 people.
And in on the continent, you know, in Africa, where there was slavery, the difference with slavery and most that we know about is that it is a person who is caught up in a war. They're a prisoner of war. They are a slave. But after so many years, you will you'll let them go. But that's something that we know from Nigeria, Ghana, and a couple other places. We don't know how slavery was in other parts of Africa, but we know that it was there. It's power through violence is what creates slavery. And, you know, and another different kind of way we could say that, in terms of power, force, the only institution that is allowed to use force is what?
The military.
The state.
That's it.
The state. Force is a big part of power and governance. It is. You know, I remember thinking when the 9/11 happened, and they were talking about the policies, what they were going to do, you know, in the future if that happened, and they were talking about that if a plane is hijacked, that fighter jets are going to come up. And at first I thought, ooh, then they can save us. I thought, well, wait a minute, they can really shoot my ass.
Everybody is about to be exterminated.
They got me on this camera thing.
That's right. They've heard it
But you
before.
know, the person who has control of the force is the person who rules. And if they keep it over generations, then you internalize that that's the way it's supposed to be. That's what culture is. Culture is something that moves and changes constantly, right? So that if a black person from the 1800s met us, they probably wouldn't believe where we are. They probably wouldn't believe that. You know, so this guy, I gotta find his album's gonna work for me. The last Reconstruction congressman, his name was something White, which I thought was ironic. But he does this speech when he's leaving saying, oh, well, we'll be back. We're coming back. I don't know when, but we are, right? And so if he could see us now, you know, he would be, you know, surprised. And another thing we're going to talk about is, toward the end of this class, is the difference between the 4 populations of black people and why we don't function as one. Immigrants from Africa do not associate themselves with us very much, right? The same with people coming from the Caribbean now, and from Europe, because, you know, there's a large black population in Europe, and we don't function as one. You know, now, ideologies, nationalism, Pan-Africanism, and all that would say that we would. And we do on a particular, you know, on a certain level. You know, none of those 4 groups are against affirmative action. Right? But to live and interact with the black community on an ongoing basis, I see no evidence of that.
And that was part of my question. The Pan-Africanist, African intellectuals, black, in professional blacks, started getting together somewhere around the 20s and the 30s and started with the big conferences that they were having right here in the United States and incorporating Africa. And it seemed to have come about, it seemed like Reconstruction was stopped in about 1980 something or other. And Reconstruction started in about 1980.
1865 to 1877.
Okay, 1870, so about 1880 it started, it was over. And I think it took black people maybe 10 or 15 years to say, oh my goodness, this is getting worse and worse and worse. This is not, you know, you keep thinking it can't get this, it's going to be better. No. So when that started, did the Pan-Africanists, I'll call them, these intellectuals that came together, did they think about incorporating everybody else? Let's all get together.
I just did in my class the other day at IUPUI. We were talking about the different types of, that when black people started to come north is when things are industrializing. And we're talking about unions, and people coming from Eastern Europe talking about urines and Marxism and this and that and that and this. And as black people came up here, they learned about those different viewpoints and embraced those different types of ideologies. And how do you accept somebody else's view if you think you're right? Right, so you had A. Philip Randolph supported socialism. Garvey at some point is for capitalism and nationalism, right? Du Bois begins as an integrationist, and he changes over time. Seal Briggs is communist, right? And they're all in New York, all up in the north, and they disagree with each other. They don't think what the other one's doing is right. And so it's kind of hard to bring people together when you don't think that what they're doing is right. But the interesting thing that happened, and you read Black Star, the interesting thing that happened is that the race people were not married or wedded to an ideology. If they saw somebody else's was working, then they would go to that one. But they wouldn't go to that one until they could see that what they thought was right was not necessarily working. And so that's a problem in politics, period. How do you work with somebody who you think is wrong?
Well, you have to find places of similarity.
It's called compromise.
Yeah.
It's called compromise.
And that's not
Which is
unique.
how you got that 3/5 of a person down.
And that's not unique to people's culture.
No, but we are part of that. And as a part of the human family, we're a part of that. Of how people interface with each other and what they believe.
Yeah, and then on the issue of the three different groups,
Yeah.
four,
Yeah,
the cultural experiences are different also.
exactly,
And so that
exactly,
informs how you move through the world too.
exactly. I
Marlo,
would agree.
you talked about, well, slavery started like in the early 1500s. And how long did, according to what you know, did it take where people that being brought from Africa and speaking these different languages to be able to get to a point where they could begin to communicate and organize or, work together around, resistance, I guess I would say?
Because they had to learn the language of the oppressor.
How long did you think did it take? When did this first start appearing?
I guess I'd have to get a linguist in here to discuss that, but it would seem to me you would have to learn rudimentary language to do what you were being forced to do.
And you said the first rebellion of black folks was when?
1521.
1520.
On the boats on the well.
Oh, no, Florida, in Florida. Well, I'm sure it was on the boats too, from the 1400s going forward.
When did Afghanistan happen? Is that all up in the 1800s?
I think it's early 1800s, honestly. Let me look it up.
Maybe they had turned that ship around. Well, took it away.
Yeah.
But I was just thinking that even then, like right now, I feel like I do community work. Activism is a word for me. It's meeting community challenges. What's going on in our community needs to be addressed, and that's where I want to work.
You're a race woman.
Every day. But I find that while working to make things better, as I'm sure these Africans who have lived in America, these African Americans, these professionals, these big time guys who are putting all this Pan-African stuff together, where was the idea of looking around to say we have got to bring all of us together because we all have this, I like to think of the four black groups as you were talking about, the Africans that come over and the Caribbeans and the ones that come from England. Nobody black was going to get a house north of 38th Street in 1950. Red line applied to them too.
Well, see, here's the deal.
Well, we understand.
African immigration, legal immigration, didn't start until Clinton signed the bill for diversity in immigration. And so when he did that in the 1990s, they thought most of the people would be coming from Asia, right? They wouldn't think about no black folks. And what did Trump call them, shithole countries?
Yeah.
Yeah. They weren't talking about Africans, they thought it was gonna be Asians, particularly South Asia, Southeast Asia, you know, and China. Right? But the diversity visa program applied to African nations too, and so if you think about it, you didn't start seeing a lot of Africans here until after the 1995 law came into place. During the 60s, they sided with us, you know, as black people. Not only the leaders like Nkrumah, if you go back and look at the UNIA papers, it's like 10 volumes, and you can see where you see a few black people who came here to go to school or something. They had no choice. They had no choice but to be with black people because segregation was so strong. But in the 1990s, it's not as strong, right? And if a person is, you know, I'm not saying this on camera. I'm not talking about all Africans now. But some Africans differentiate themselves from us because we have been slaves. And so they feel that we are not on the same level as they are. But an African in Africa who had been enslaved or who was considered second class or whatever, they look down on that person too. So it's not the part of being black that has something to do with it. It's class and that has a lot to do with that, right? And the association between people who have come from Africa and come into America, for some reason, I can't figure this out. They are hosted by white families.
Yeah.
I don't know why. I have no idea. You know, that would be something I would like to study, but I'm done with that. Girlfriend is free.
I have a question about, I guess, free black folks in the early, I guess, 1500s and when slavery is going on. So did they primarily come from people escaping to become free, or, and then what percentage, I guess, of the population, black population in the United
It
States?
was a small percentage, but some, you know, manumission, as I said, you know, manumission from up around New York coming down to maybe about Virginia. Manumission, and in some slave states you could buy your freedom. They will allow you to buy your freedom and buy your family's freedom. That's why they say that, you know, white nationalists will say that black people were slave holders because they bought people. Well, they were buying their families. Now, there have been a few studies that said that there were some black people who did have plantations. But I haven't seen good evidence of that. But, you know, that is a theory that is out there. And Paulette said y'all can have some food and stuff.
Yeah. 3:30.
All right, let's go.
Thank you. October 12th.
Did you say Reconstruction?
The rest of it.
There's a 4-part series on PBS on Reconstruction.
Yeah, I did.
That's might be informative to the dialogue.